honestly, we're a little bit crazy. I've always been a risk taker, but in an entrepreneurial spirit. Our expressions of churches, are they a net positive to the community? Or are they kind of seen as this net negative? And obviously, as the culture is increasingly seen, the stereotyping of churches and Christians and just churches kind of have a posture of we exist for ourselves. That really didn't fit with my understanding of the way Jesus lived or the scripture.
Welcome to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Bryant. In every episode, we bring in guests who will inspire, encourage you to be more effective in your mission field. On today's episode, I have my good friend, Nick Schock. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing good, Eric. Good to see you today.
You too. It's been so fun these last several years. You're a pastor here in South Austin. You organize a group of us to get together once a month. We come together to share what's happening and pray. Talk about maybe for a minute why you value pastors getting together with pastors so much. Why is that such an important part of what you feel called to do?
Yeah, I think, Eric, that it comes pretty natural to me that, I grew up in ministry. I saw a lot of pastors that were isolated. They didn't really have a space to just talk about what they were working through, what they were struggling with. And I just felt like from early on in student ministry days, I just naturally was a connector and said, hey, like, how are you doing? And do you have a space where you get to talk about, the things that you're challenged by, the things you're working through and wrestling with as a ministry leader? And what I found is like a lot of guys were really alone. And they just needed a place to kind of, uh, maybe even speak out some of the stuff they were feeling some angst about, and or just some stuff that they were considering doing. Was this, should I even be considering this? And honestly, I just believe there's such a power in prayer. And I can't remember where I first heard it, but I think it kind of captured my attention. But also, like, the way I process is that, am I, the pastor of a church, or am I a pastor of the church? And I really like that second way of saying that. Like, I'm a pastor of the church, and that concept that we're all part of, the body of Christ, and we get to have a unique role in these local expressions. And so I have a real passion for getting guys together to encourage them, to build them up, pray with them, and just to help learn from each other and grow from each other in the process.
It's been a real gift to me, the friendship that we have and the others. It really is a respite, a place where I can let my hair down, so to speak, and if I had any. But it's one of those things that is really life-giving. And what's especially fun is coming to your campus. You planted a church a few years back called The pointatx.org. And you guys have some really creative ways of engaging with the community. I would love for you just to describe some of what you've already done and what you're even looking to do, as some of these church leaders might be looking for creative ways, kind of out of the box thinking. That's certainly something I see you demonstrating.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're a little bit crazy. I've always been a risk taker, but in an entrepreneurial spirit. But really, there's so much backstory to it, and I won't take all the time to tell that today. That, having, as I mentioned earlier, grown up in the church, and from an early age, like really having a vision for how are we going to, connect with people outside the church walls, and how are we going to engage the community around us, and increasingly through the years, our expressions of churches, are they a net positive to the community? Or are they kind of seen as this net negative? And obviously, as the culture is increasingly seen, both the stereotyping of churches and Christians and just churches kind of have a posture of we exist for ourselves. That really didn't fit with my understanding of the way Jesus lived or the scripture. And so that philosophy started to rise up within me, that whatever God put in our hands to steward, as we were planting a church and we were living as missionaries to our city, more than even just establishing a worship service, we wanted to be a kind of people that said we want to be a blessing to the place we live. And that's going to obviously be how we engage people personally, but also how we steward what we have, be it land or buildings or whatever space. And so within that, we have a crazy backstory that was just a God thing. We never anticipated having land or a building. We thought we'd be nomadic. We would just be kind of moving around from spaces and renting spaces, and in that way, even making ourselves accessible to people who maybe wouldn't go to a traditional church. So as we were doing that, we were approached by another group, another local church expression. And through a series of prayer and meetings and conversations and seeking counsel and reading material, we really came to this belief that we were supposed to work together. And in doing that, we inherited, I mean, this is a very short version of it, but we ended up inheriting 10 acres of land and a building. And really immediately it shifted, of course, like what we were doing with our time and energy, because up until that point, we hadn't had those resources available. So therefore, we were just approaching ministry very differently. And now all of a sudden we had this to steward, and it was like, what are we going to do with this? And I remember, a couple weeks into the merger process, even like, I think we should just sell it all, and just give the money to missionaries and church planters and all that. Cause I just don't know if I really want to manage this. But thankfully, I had a group of elders and even just my own check in my spirit, like, this is not what God's asking us to do. So we began to just trying to open the space as much as we could to the community, namely even starting with just church planters. So there were a lot of churches and church planters in our area who were doing what we were doing previously, which was using rented spaces, and they didn't have access to that space 24/7. So they were coming here for prayer gatherings and baptisms and leadership training meetings. And so pretty soon there were 6 or 7 different churches, rotating through and using this building, which was so fun because it's like, This is the way the church should function, is we should all help each other and encourage each other. And so it became very natural. And of course, we had been gifted 10 acres of land and a building. It's like, let's be a gift, like with what we've been gifted with. And so in that whole conversation, what you kind of described, even as you've come down here and seen the evolution of the property and the development of the process, we started asking 10 years ago, like, what would we build here that would be, again, a net positive and a real blessing to the community? So there's been lots of conversations ongoing nationally right now about like sustainability of facilities as churches have waned in size and as costs have increased, even things like property insurance, et cetera. And so from a sustainability conversation, we wanted to begin to think about what are some ways that the property could generate revenue, but to not just generate revenue so that we could keep our ministry alive, though that's important, but that would actually be a win-win. So it would benefit the community and create some sustainable income for the ministries. And ultimately, what we landed on, we threw a big party on the property, just out in front of the building that exists here. And we just, asked all the neighbors, hey, what would benefit you? What would you love to see built on this property that would benefit you and your family? And we kind of had thoughts in our mind about what those things would be. But sure enough, the top 10 list of things that came back were pretty consistent with what we would have thought, which, hopefully meant we were paying attention to the people around us. But one of the top on the list was a food park with a play area for kids. Food parks are very popular here in Austin. There's nothing down in this particular part of the city where we live. And we're surrounded by both multifamily housing as well as 2 or 3 brand new neighborhoods that have come online here. And so we begin that process post that party of building a food park. And so we now have a food park. It's called Way South Food Park in Austin. You can actually look that up online. And it's been really
so
fun
good too,
because we've got 9 trucks of a variety of type. And those trucks, they pay rent monthly to be here, but we also really work with them to build community. And so we host parties regularly, at least once a month. People host their birthday parties here. There's fundraisers here. We have live music out here on the stage we built. It's really become a little community hotspot in this pocket of the city, which didn't really have that before. And as a result of that, I mean, one of the questions, people would ask is like, do you overtly like try to, evangelize people when they come? And the short answer is no. We try to just get to know people, know their story. But we have a number of people who are now part of Point Community Church and our family here because they came to get coffee, they came to get barbecue, they came to get some Thai food. They're like, what's that building over there? And do you know anything about them? And so I could just tell you story after story of people who've gotten to just say, hey, like you should come and join us. And they've come, they've shown up. So that food park has been really cool. It's the other piece of it is we just finished this year. So, here we are in January. We just did the financials for 2024. And it made money as a food park. It made
Wow.
money, which was, again, that wasn't like the id go, like we got to make a bunch of money, but it turned a profit. And then we turned around and used that money to help support some missionaries and some continue to
That's
advance the park.
great. I love it. Well, in that food park, there's so many great restaurants, but there's also a food truck
Yeah.
that you guys also own or manage, or is that your family? Somehow you're very involved with the coffee, I know.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny you asked that. So, we had to create, as you can imagine, we had to create some like systems and structures because we had felt like we wanted to launch some kingdom-minded businesses that would again be a blessing and benefit to the community. It would create some context for discipling people, especially young leaders. And I love coffee, love hanging out with people, drinking a good cup of coffee. When I got to Austin, I was definitely not a coffee connoisseur, didn't really know much about it, but in my time in Austin, I've grown into a coffee snob, and so have a love for really good coffee. So we decided about 2 years ago to launch what's called Doxa Coffee Roasters here in South Austin. And so one of the first trucks on the property, because we knew that the park was being built, of course, was a coffee truck. And that coffee truck has grown immensely. In fact, we just, looked at the bottom line yesterday. We're like, wow, this thing is growing rapidly, which is really fun. But the whole goal was to build these coffee trucks, these coffee trailers that we could both develop young leaders to run them and to build a staff and build a team with just a way of like really loving people well. So our kind of whole phrase is we serve excellent food and drink so that people know they matter. And so that's our tagline for the business. And we try to tell our team that. But in that, we hope now we've expanded to a second trailer. We're getting ready to launch a third trailer in Mueller and then a fourth and fifth later this year. And the goal is really
Wow.
that people many times are more loyal to their coffee truck or their coffee place than they are just about anything. It's like kind of their definitely more than their church a lot of times. But we were said, we'll use these coffee spaces to build community. And then those could potentially become, church plants even in the future. A guy
Yeah.
could go in there. At a minimum, we're just building community because we know so many stories now that we would have known. We've gotten to pray for people who are hurting. People showed up, literally the other day, a lady's at the trailer. She's being really mean to our barista. And our barista is just like, doing her very best to just love her. And the lady finally just like breaks down. She's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm being mean. I know that I shouldn't be treating you like this. She's like, I just lost my husband and I really don't know what to
Oh,
do. And our barista just came out of the trailer, came around and just hugged her and said, can I pray for you? And just got to do that. And I know you don't have to be, you
wow.
know, in coffee business to have those kind of encounters, but the fact that those kind of encounters are
Yeah.
happening because we said that's one of our desires is just to be able to connect with
Yeah.
with people, and when they show up to get their coffee, we pray they would leave loved.
Mm. So beautiful. And it is excellent coffee. I've had it and have enjoyed it many times. And, one of the other things that's been fun is, we've experimented by bringing in a group called Dwell
Yeah,
Co-working. Their goal is to end loneliness one coworker
yeah,
at a time. And they fill up our lobby and auditorium. I introduced them to you. You guys have a co-working space now with Dwell. It's been such a great way, again, to meet people who wouldn't normally come in through the front doors, so to speak, and some will start coming on
yeah,
Sunday. But I wanted to talk about your church planting idea through the coffee shop or the coffee truck. You're part of the Hill Country Association of Churches, plantaustin.com. Some real creative kind of micro church strategies I've heard you talk about. Maybe for a moment, just share some of the more creative ways you're seeing people planting here in Austin, and even whether it's through the coffee trucks or otherwise.
yeah. So I have a group of guys. You mentioned the Association of Hill Country Churches. That movement, and it started, like I mentioned, back in the 90s. They actually started planting churches, sort of big cookie cutter churches where it was a hive off a large group of people. And over the years, planted like 42 churches in Greater Austin, and so it's been a really
It's
fun journey to
amazing.
watch. Now, currently, out of those that were planted, some have either combined, some have moved on, some have even have moved outside the association. But within the association, there's continued to be a desire to say, let's saturate our city with the good news of Jesus, the love of Jesus, And we think church planting is the predominant way we could do that. And so we've tried to find new ways to establish disciple-making churches. And there's now a group of about 14. I just got off a call before this, where there's about 14 guys that are in different parts of the city doing different kinds of things. And, some of them are working with artists and creatives. Some of the guys are working in the poverty-stricken areas of East Austin, establishing some networks of disciples there, especially amongst some of the youth. Love what they're doing. There's a guy up in Georgetown in the north part of the city that they're doing some great work with some internationals in apartments. And then there's a guy over in Circle C who's an airline pilot that they're just basically starting these neighborhood community groups, and it's growing relatively rapid because people are lonely and they want community. And so it's just, to me, what's been really cool is when people are just faithful to love their neighbor and to point them to Christ, and then to see those disciple making communities established, it's contagious. And my goal has been predominantly just to encourage guys to keep going, like kind of throw fuel in their fire, and then to make sure that they stay connected. Just met with a guy who's going to be starting in Mueller area, who's a sports writer, and he's doing some creative things there where there's so many of these young adults who, they're full of life and energy, but they're lonely and they need community, and they don't know the hope of Christ. And so that's been really fun to just say, hey, whatever we can do to support you and help you as you're building a network of relationships there. So those are some of the things that are going on around the city. Apartment life. Some people know about apartment life. Apartment life is really turning up their dial in terms of just trying to empower their teams who are ready and willing to engage. And so last night we established a new group in an apartment here locally that, for all intents and purposes, it's a church plant, but they're doing a ton of work, and they're meeting in their clubhouse, and just got some pictures this morning from them, and I'm just so fired up because it was a reminder God's working in some big ways in these little small spaces.
Yeah, apartment life is a creative way. I mean, they basically hire a couple of people to come and create community there at the apartment complex in order to retain, renters. But apartment life are people who follow Jesus, so they get Christ followers to get in those positions, and suddenly it's, like you said, building community. And the offshoot of that is churches are planted. You talk about some of the future plans at the point. This to me is where it gets even more fun. Just there's rumors of pickleball courts and apartment complexes. Just talk about some of what you see for the future.
I appreciate that. I mean, I love that we're seeing some of the things that God's put in our hearts, a decade ago start to unfold. And the food truck park that I mentioned and the co-working space you mentioned, which is here, those have been sort of proof of concept that the community can engage this space and utilize it, and I think experience a peace just when they come on the property. But as we thought about what beyond that could happen, we wanted to consider that we have about 5 acres that are undeveloped currently, and it's really, we get approached fairly often about people wanting to buy the property, and it would be really easy to sell it, take the money, and just do some other things with it, because we really never have intended to be a mega church and have a big facility. Not that we're anti that, that's not who we are. And so we began to have a conversation about what are some of the, real needs in our city. And affordable housing is a big challenge. But when we got into the affordable housing conversation, what we realized is there's actually a conversation around attainable housing. The difference predominantly has more to do with the fact that affordable housing is, maybe in the lower income realm, where attainable housing is you got people who don't qualify for affordable housing, but they serve in our city. So nurses, first responders, school teachers, even professors, at the local universities, they are outside of the affordable housing, requirements, but they want to be able to live in the city. So most of them are having to go out to the suburbs and some of these cities that just creates a harder commute, et cetera. So we started to work with developers. We've now landed on a full concept plan to put 60 townhomes on the property that would be sold to people in that space as an attainable housing. So, it's a long-term land lease, but ultimately they would get to buy it so they can build equity. And these townhomes are very, they're very spacious for a townhome. A small family could live in. I mean, they're 3-bedroom townhomes, but they will be built around a communal park. And so the park in the center, you kind of refer to the pickleball, but pickleball, sand volleyball, a pavilion, and the food truck park will kind of be relocated to the centerpiece. We kind of call it the hearth, the welcome space for the community. And then a soccer pitch and a little space out there with a little some play space for kids, and just trying to build a community where these folks, as they move in, will be able to build the kind of community that we believe the kingdom has available. And so we want people to get a taste of the good city to come, if you will. And it's kind of the language we like to use around here. And then within that, as one piece of it, we're going to be building a school for what we would call entrepreneurial missional leaders, where we'll have 24 18 to 25-year-olds on site who have a heart, not necessarily to go into full-time ministry roles, but just want to be a part of the kingdom in spaces where they're establishing new businesses or new ventures. And so the hope is to be able to equip them here on site. We're going to start that school next fall before we even have the building, the house built. But when we do build the house, it's kind of cool because we've designed it where it's got roll-up garage doors that open up to the park. And that idea
That's
that
awesome.
they can immediately go right out onto the lawn and engage the community in which we live. They could serve in some of these different needs that we have, whether that's the co-working space or the food park, while they're here being trained. So there's some hands-on training along with some classroom training. It's very communal in how we see that. So
that is amazing. If someone wanted more information about that, do you have that up online somewhere?
So we haven't yet. We were in the process of actually talking about how we want to put that on a website for people. We've kept it all pretty internal right now as we've been developing it, as you can imagine, trying not to leak too much information too quickly. But yeah, as we just finished up the concept plan in October, and we hope to break ground this next fall officially. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the scope of timeline that we're at. But
yeah. Well, part of what people don't necessarily realize, they may be hearing this thinking, well, I don't know how to build townhomes or do construction. Yeah. Like in many ways, you've partnered with an organization or even the city, isn't it? I mean, you're not having to do all this work. You're the one building the connections to make it happen. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it would never happen if we were trying to do all this, right? Because it's just so much on top of everything else we're doing. And I tend to be, high capacity, got a lot of hands in a lot of things. But ultimately, we're working with a group called Capital A here in Austin, a common vision to help people with this attainable housing conversation. But they're incredible in terms of just their knowledge base, their relationship with the city, being aware of how to make this become reality. And so been really grateful for that partner. And I think that every city, every place has these groups there that are interested. And so for us, I mean, we just spend a lot of time praying and asking God, okay, God, we need the right conversations and the right connections. And just through the network in which we had, somebody's like, you really need to talk to these guys. And as soon as we talked, it was like, wow, this is just a hand in glove kind of fit.
Match. Yeah.
And we've been able to work with them. So we're super grateful because we could not have done this without that kind of skill set that they have and their expertise.
Well, I appreciate so much, Nick, the way you've invited me and other pastors in the area into community. And it's fun watching what God is doing in and through you and what we're able to do together. Keep up the great work.
Oh, man, it's fun. We love what you guys are doing, Eric. And I mean, for me, it's just to know that there's other guys in the trenches going after the same goal, man. I'm just grateful.
Thanks for joining us. More resources available at ericbryant.org.